Okay, good morning, everyone. We have resumed the proceedings for the criminal preliminary hearing calendar for this morning. Again, my name is Judge Tamika West, and I'm presiding. The first case that we have scheduled for a hearing today is going to be at position 14, the state of Georgia versus Chase E. Dewar. The state will be represented by ADA Cheryl Freeman. Mr. Dewar is represented by attorney Robert Booker. I'm going to read the warrant numbers and the charges, and then we'll proceed forward with the testimony. So pending, we have against Mr. Dewar warrant number 2023 CW 52741 for the charge of rape. Second warrant number 2023 CW 52742 for the charge of aggravated sexual battery. Those are the two charges. ADA Freeman, are you ready to call your first witness?
Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, please proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Officer Gill, you can unmute yourself. Would you raise your right hand, please?
Yes, ma'am.
Do you swear and affirm that the testimony about to provide in the matter of state of Georgia versus Dewar Chase will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, ma'am.
You can lower your hand. Please tell us your name and how you're employed.
My name is Officer Latoya Gill. I'm currently employed with Clayton State University Police Department.
How long have you been with the Clayton State University Police Department?
I was hired with them June of last year, a little over a year now.
Prior to joining the Clayton State University Police Department, were you employed in another agency?
No, ma'am.
Okay. And while working with the Clayton State University Police Department, were you working on May 26th of 2023? This year. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. I was off that day.
Okay. And when you returned to work, you returned on the next day, May 27th?
That's correct.
And when you returned to work, were you assigned a case involving, I'm just going to use the last name of Miss Evans as a victim?
I was assigned that case on May 28th.
Okay, so May 28th, what information were you provided regarding an incident that occurred involving Miss Evans?
I got to speak with Miss Evans. Miss Evans let me know that she was involved with Mr. Dewar. They weren't in a committed relationship. They had met online. They were engaging in sexual intercourse more than once, to include the day of the assault. She mentioned that she was raped by Mr. Dewar.
Was Miss Evans, I know you stated that they had been engaged previously in a consensual sexual relationship. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am, that's correct.
What did Miss Evans indicate that occurred on May 26th of 2023?
Miss Evans stated on that day, Mr. Dewar had stopped by earlier around noon to get his hair twisted by her. At that time, they got something to eat. During the time, after getting something to eat, he went home. She later gave him a call a few hours later and asked him if he could return in reference to a possible party located in Jonesboro. Mr. Dewar declined coming to the party. Miss Evans then asked Mr. Dewar if he would be interested in just coming over to see her, coming over to her apartment instead of going to a party. Mr. Dewar consented to coming to see her. Miss Evans stated she asked Mr. Dewar if he can bring over a couple of drinks, in which Mr. Dewar agreed to bringing over some drinks he had at his home. Mr. Dewar, who lives about an hour away from campus where Miss Evans lives, he lives in Loganville, Georgia. She said it took him about an hour to make it over to her.
Wait 1 second, Officer Gill. Attorney Jones, can you place yourself on mute?
Let me see if I can.
Thank you. You can continue, Officer Gill.
Yes, ma'am. At that time, Mr. Dubois agreed to bring over some liquor that he had in his home, in which he brought over inside of water bottles and not the actual bottles that the liquor originally came in. He arrived about an hour later, in which Miss Evans stated that she was tired by time he got over and she wasn't interested in having any sexual intercourse. She just wanted company for that evening. Mr. Dubois agreed to staying over her room at that time. Miss Evans consented to allowing Mr. Dubois to stay over during that time, in which throughout the night they began to cuddle consensually, kiss consensually. Miss Evans stated that Mr. Dubois got more touchy-feely, as she referred to it. And she continued at that moment to let him know she is not interested in engaging in any sexual activities beyond that kiss and cuddling. Miss Evans stated Mr. Dubois then placed her on top of him and forced himself inside of her roughly. After
At this, let me go back a second, Officer Gill. When you say that Ms. Evans indicated that Mr. Dubois started to get more than touchy-feely, did he use any other parts of his body to penetrate her with?
Yes, Miss Evans stated he used his finger to finger her with prior to inserting himself.
Okay. And when Mr. Dubois placed his finger inside of her, what part of her did he place his finger?
He placed his finger inside of her vagina.
Was that consensual based on what Ms. Evans stated?
Based on what Ms. Evans stated, it was not consensual. It caught her off guard.
After Mr. Dubois placed his finger inside of Ms. Evans' vagina, what happened?
Ms. Evans stated he then reached for a condom that was nearby the nightstand. He had a bag near that nightstand, which he pulled the condom out of. He began to place the condom on himself and then insert himself inside of Miss Evans' vagina.
At this point, what was Ms. Evans saying to Mr. Dubois?
At this point, Miss Evans stated to me that she froze in the moment due to just shock and prior trauma. She froze and she just couldn't speak. She went mute and was unable to say anything at that time.
Had Ms. Evans told Mr. Dubois that she did not want to have sex with him at that time?
Not in that moment. Miss Evans stated in that moment she was mute. She was unable to say anything. She mentioned not wanting to have sex prior to him inserting his fingers inside of her.
Was this in Miss Evans' apartment?
Yes, ma'am.
Is this at the Laker Village Apartments?
Yes, ma'am.
Would that be 5751 North Lake Drive?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that in Clayton County?
That is.
Was this, or were these apartments located on the campus of Clayton State University?
Yes, ma'am.
What did Ms. Evans say what happened after Mr. Dubois, after he finished having sex with her?
Miss Evans stated after she finished having sex with Mr. Dubois, she laid there. She laid there. She couldn't sleep. She said she caught herself staring at the ceiling. Mr. Dubois fell right to sleep, as she mentioned.
When did Ms. Evans indicate Mr. Dubois left her apartment?
Ms. Evans indicated Mr. Dubois left her apartment that next morning at 09:50, the morning of the 27th.
At that time, what did Ms. Evans do?
At that time, Ms. Evans stated she asked Mr. Dubois if he can go to the store and purchase a Plan B birth control and return with it. Return at the on that same day with it to her apartment.
Did Ms. Evans indicate whether or not Mr. Dubois did that?
Yes, Mr. Dubois did leave her apartment and return several minutes later with a Plan B birth control.
From your interview with Ms. Evans, did she indicate whether or not Mr. Dubois made any comments about what happened that previous evening?
Mr. Dubois, Ms. Evans stated that the very next morning, later that day of the 27th, Mr. Dubois sent her several text messages. She sent him several text messages, actually, in which he replied. And some of his reply was remorseful, seemed remorseful. He seemed as if he felt it was consensual. She stated that it wasn't in those text messages.
Did you screenshot those text messages?
Yes, ma'am.
If you can, you stated that Mr. Dubois seemed remorseful. Now, is that your interpretation or is that what Ms. Evans told you?
Mr. Dubois stated at least twice throughout the text messages that he apologized. He never meant to hurt her.
Did Ms. Evans report this incident to the police?
Yes, ma'am.
Was Ms. Evans taken to get a rape kit?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you able to collect any physical evidence from her apartment?
From her person
From her
during the
person?
rape kit. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. The condom that was used by Mr. Dubois, was that retrieved?
Yes, ma'am.
Was all these things placed into evidence?
Yes, ma'am.
Officer Gill, were there any witnesses to
Yes,
this
ma'am.
incident?
Her roommate escorted Miss Evans to the hospital. Her roommate was the one who actually reached out to public safety. At that time, she was unable to talk to us on her own.
Was the witness or her roommate, was this a male or a female?
This is a female. She shared her dorm room with the female.
Was the roommate present during the actual rape?
No, ma'am.
Was the roommate the first person that Miss Evans told what happened?
Yes, ma'am.
Did you get a statement from the roommate?
Yes, ma'am.
Officer Gill, since this incident was reported, have you had an opportunity to interview Mr. Dubois?
Yes. Yes, I have.
Did Mr. Dubois make any admissions regarding the rape?
During the interview, let's get his exact statement. Mr. Dubois did confirm that he did engage in sexual intercourse with Miss Evans during that time on those dates. Mr. Dubois stated that it was consensual sex.
Did you question Mr. Dubois regarding the text messages that you had reviewed where he apologized?
Yes, ma'am.
What did Mr. Dubois state regarding those text messages?
Regarding those text messages, Mr. Dubois tried to clarify the text messages. Mr. Dubois stated During the time when he first arrived at the apartment and Miss Evans invited him over, he stated to Miss Evans that, if she would, he wasn't expecting to have driven over an hour just to lay there and not talk, or, it wasn't ideal for them. On the prior occasions of meeting, they would come over, have drinks, and it would lead to sex. Mr. Dubois did state that he wasn't assuming that they would have sex during that time. Mr. Dubois stated after they began to cuddle, she turned to him. He asked her throughout the night if she wanted him to leave. And when he saw that she did not really want to engage in any kind of conversation, she just wanted to lay there quietly, he asked her if she wanted him to leave. And Miss Evans replied back, "I called you over here for a reason," in her words, without specifically stating what that reason would be. So Mr. Dubois agreed to stay and spend the night. He said throughout the night, they began to cuddle and kiss consensually, in which at that time, Miss Evans asked him do he have a condom? Mr. Dubois stated that he did have a condom on him, but he was in no rush to reach for the condom out of his bag. Mr. Dubois stated he waited a few minutes prior to reaching for that condom out of his bag, in which he did do so and placed the condom on. During the time of placing the condom on, Mr. Dubois stated that Miss Evans told him, "You have 10 seconds to place the condom on." So he placed the condom on fastly, in which Mr. Dubois stated Miss Evans placed herself on top of him and inserted his penis into her vagina, guided his penis into her vagina herself.
And also, Gil, I just want to make sure I'm understanding. Yeah. He indicated that the text messages where he apologized, that those were interpreted incorrectly.
Yes, ma'am.
What did he indicate that he was apologizing for?
He was apologizing that she felt the way she was feeling that morning. He was unaware. He said several times, prior occasions where they would have sex, he mentioned in his own words, they were always on that same type of time to where it would lead to sex. She might say no, and then they would engage in it. He said in reference to when he mentioned in a text where he said he heard her say no and proceeded to have sex with her anyway, that was in reference to when he heard her initially, when he arrived to her apartment, state that she was not looking to have sex. But once they began to cuddle and kiss consensually, she then asked him to reach for the condom. At that point, she was no longer saying no or resisting.
And that was, he said, his interpretation.
That was his interpretation.
Okay. Were you able to speak to any of the witnesses at the apartment complex to see if they had heard or if they saw anything?
I spoke to Miss Evans' roommate. She was the only one I was able to speak to. I asked her questions regarding how Miss Evans approached her with the topic. Miss Evans' roommate stated that throughout the day, she can tell Miss Evans was walking around the common area of their apartment, which is like the kitchen and the sofa area of that apartment, quiet and to herself. She can tell that something, like, she just didn't seem like herself. So she asked her if something was wrong. And that's when Miss Evans started to break down and cry and confess later that evening that the incident that had occurred between herself and Mr. Dubois.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Yes, ma'am.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
I'm gonna, yes, I'm sorry, I hit my device off mute. Your witness, Attorney Booker.
Okay. Thank you, Judge. And good morning, Officer Gill.
Good morning, sir.
All right, just a few questions for you. So Mr. DeWar and Ms. Evans met prior to May 26th, correct?
That's correct.
And they both indicated that they had a consensual sexual relationship prior to May 26th.
That's correct.
And they were both college students, I guess, at this time. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And so on May 28th, you were assigned this case, correct?
Correct.
Okay. What date was the report made to law enforcement? Was it made on the 27th or the 28th?
The 28th.
Okay. And at what time of day was it made to law enforcement?
That was made at 23:30.
So at like 11:30 p.m.?
Yes,
So this is about 48 hours after the alleged event. Is that right?
that's right.
Okay. And how was the incident reported? Through 911, or how did they report it?
They reported it through 911.
Okay. All right. And so when law enforcement went out, was it the school law enforcement, as in yourself, or was it Clayton County? Who went out there?
It originally came into Clayton County Dispatch. Clayton County Dispatch referred it over to us because it's
Okay.
within our scope, and it was
Okay.
myself who responded.
Okay. And when you got there, you interviewed Miss Evans at that time. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And were you wearing a body camera at that time?
Yes, sir.
And was that recorded and kept as part of the record of this case?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And did you interview the roommate as well that time?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And was the interview of the roommate recorded as well on body worn camera?
Yes, sir.
And was that kept part of the record?
Yes, sir.
And were they interviewed together or separately?
Separately.
Okay. And can you describe the inside of this place? Is an apartment, 2-story, single story?
These are apartments. They are 2 to 3 rooms.
Mhm.
I believe her apartment has 3 bedrooms within it.
Okay. And in reference to each other, are they all on the same floor, same hall?
It's it's like a suite, and it's
Okay.
room within, 3 rooms
All right.
within that suite. And then there's a common area in the middle, but they have their individual rooms.
Okay. So going back to May 26th, that day when Mr. DeWar was present, there was no other parties present on that day, correct? The roommate wasn't there.
Not inside of Miss Evans' room, no.
Okay. Was she in the apartment?
Not to my known knowledge.
Okay. So, and to the best of your knowledge, it was just Miss Evans and Mr. DeWar there on May 26th.
Yes, to the best of my knowledge.
Okay. And the roommate showed up on May 27th. Is that correct?
That's correct. She was made aware of the incident on May 27th.
Okay. And then on May 27th, there was no report of this, not until about another 24 hours later is when it's reported.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, the text communication between my client, Mr. DeWar, and Miss Evans, was that on May 26th or May 27th?
27th.
And was that in the afternoon?
The text started early morning. I want to
Early
say
morning
at
on
least
27th?
11. Yes, up to
Okay.
27th.
All right. Okay. And at what point in those text messages did Miss Evans indicate that she did not want to have sex? Was that the initial text message, or was that something further along in the process?
That was part of the initial text messages.
Okay. And so they text from 11 a.m. and throughout the afternoon.
That's correct.
Okay. But again, it's not until May 28th at 11:30 p.m. that they reported to 911.
That's correct.
Okay. And it's not Miss Evans that makes the report, it's actually the roommate that makes the report, correct?
The roommate calls us. Yes, for her.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So on May 26th, just going through this quickly, she invites him over that morning or at noon that day to eat. He eats there, is my understanding is correct, and then goes home and comes back?
That's correct.
Okay. And so when he comes back around, what time does he get there on the 26th? Do you know?
He gets there on the 26th around 11:30 that evening.
PM? Okay.
Yes.
All right. And is the allegation of the rape allegation, is that from the 26th at that night or into the morning of the 27th? Does she have a specific time that she alleges it?
She said it was leading into the 27th. So it was between 11 p.m. of the 26th, leading into 2 a.m. of the 27th.
Okay. All right, and she indicated, and this was her words, that she consented to him staying over.
Correct,
She let him in the property.
correct,
They kissed consensually,
correct,
and they cuddled consensually.
correct.
Did she give any indication of how they dressed, as if they were going to sleep, or how they were dressed when they were doing the kissing and cuddling?
Yes, she did. Miss Evans stated the room became very hot, in which she had on some purple shorts, purple and orange shorts, and a bra. She took off her shorts and kept on her bra and panties. Mr.
Okay, so
Dubois
she-
had on some
Okay.
basketball shorts with no shirt.
Okay, so she was dressed in her underwear, and he was dressed in basketball shorts with no shirt.
Correct,
Okay, and they were in a bedroom of the house.
correct,
Okay, all right, and so they're kissing and cuddling consensually, and so her statement is, at some point, he places his finger inside of her, and prior to that, she says, "No, I don't want to, for you to do that." Correct?
that's correct.
Okay. And when that's done, is that during the time when she is supposedly on top of him as well?
Prior,
Okay,
she
so
said,
they're laying beside each other when this happens?
yes, sir.
Okay. And does she describe her underwear being moved or moved to the side in order for his finger to be inserted?
She said he moved them to the side, yes.
Okay. Did she say at any time that she physically tried to stop him?
She did not.
Did she say at any time that she yelled at him or pushed him away or screamed or anything like that?
She did not.
Okay. Were there any markings on her that showed that he was rough with her, as in he scratched her, cut her, bruised her, or anything along those lines?
I did not notice any bruises.
Okay. All right. And so once he places his finger inside her, at that point, she told him no, according to her statement. Then is that when he goes and gets a condom and places her on top of himself?
According to her statement.
Okay. And as far as her height and weight, roughly how tall and how much does she weigh? Do you know?
She is about 5'3", 5'2", 125 pounds. Fairly small.
Okay. 5'2", 5'3", 120 pounds.
That's correct.
Okay. And Mr. DeWard, do you have any idea how much he weighs and his height and weight?
Mrs. DeWallace is about 6'1", possibly 180, 185.
Okay. All right. So difference in height, difference in weight. All right.
Yeah.
And so her statement is that she is physically picked up by him. He has a condom on, and he has, I guess, removed her underwear at this point, and she has he inserts his penis inside of her.
That's correct, according to her.
Okay. And that's what she's saying was not consensual, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Now, based on what you had told Miss Freeman earlier, that she didn't tell him that at that point that she didn't want to do it. It was, she became, I think as you described her, she froze and went mute due to prior trauma, is I think what you indicated.
That is correct, according to her statement.
Okay. And I'm not going to get into this because I don't think it's for probable cause hearing, but I just wanted to make sure I heard it right. The statement was in regards to prior trauma is what you said, correct?
And what she said, yes.
Okay. All right. Now, during the time that he was getting a condom, was the condom in the same room that they were in at that time?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. And so after they had sex, they laid there in that same bed until the next morning, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And at that time, the defendant supposedly fell asleep, but she lay there awake. Is that correct?
Correct, according to her.
Okay. And she didn't get up to leave or do anything along those lines?
No, sir.
Okay. And so it wasn't until 9:50 the next morning on the 27th when Mr. DeWard leaves. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And
He leaves to return. Yes,
he leaves at her direction to go get a plan B in return, correct?
yes, correct.
Did she say why she wanted a plan B?
She stated the condom had broke while he was placing it on himself. He placed it on himself and inserted himself into her vagina, roughly causing the condom to break.
Okay, so she believed he had ejaculated.
Yes,
Is that okay?
that's correct.
Okay, and so the condom broke. She was sent to get a plan B. During the time that he was out getting a plan B, she never called 911 or law enforcement or anything like that, right?
That's correct.
Was her roommate there when he left to go get the plan B and come back?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. Did she indicate that she fixed him breakfast while he was gone to get the plan B?
She stated she did not fix him breakfast.
Did she say she fixed herself breakfast?
She stated she did not eat anything that morning.
Didn't eat anything. Okay.
Yes,
All right. And so after he left to go get the plan B, she willingly let him back in the same apartment that he had left before, correct?
correct.
And then after he is there with the plan B, he leaves at that point to go home. And they start exchanging text messages later that day, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And so jumping forth to Mr. DeWar, the text message in particular, you indicated that he seemed remorseful based on the text message.
That's correct.
In his text message, he indicated that he felt the sexual interaction was consensual, correct?
Correct.
And that his apology was, I guess you don't have it in front of you to read it out directly, but I'm assuming his apology doesn't say, "I'm sorry, I raped you" or anything like that, correct?
That's correct. It does not.
Okay. And so, I want to jump forward here as well. When Mr. DeWar met with you, he met with you twice on his own free will. Is that correct?
That is correct.
As in, he came down there to meet with you directly himself.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And were those interviews recorded as well?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And they were kept as part of evidence of this case?
Yes, sir.
Was he Mirandized prior to being interviewed?
Yes, sir.
Both times?
Both times.
Okay. And did he explain what he meant by the apologies that he had written in the text messages?
Yes, he did.
Okay. And so as they are exchanging text messages after the 27th, is there any further communication between the parties?
No, sir.
Okay. All right. So the roommate ultimately takes Miss Evans to the hospital for her to get a rape kit done. Was that on the 28th or on the 27th?
That was the 28th.
The 28th. Was
Yes.
that prior to law enforcement getting involved?
That's correct.
Okay. And was that rape kit maintained by law enforcement or by the hospital?
By the hospital, yes, sir.
Okay. Was a DNA sample taken from Mr. DeWar?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay.
They did have the condom.
It did have the condom. Okay.
Yes, sir.
But okay. All right. All right. And so the roommate said that she started talking to Miss Evans on the 27th, correct?
Correct.
On the afternoon of the 27th?
That's correct.
Okay. And the roommate, I think you already said she gave a statement. The roommate was the first person that Miss Evans spoke to about this, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And Mr. DeWar, his impression or his explanation when he met with you twice was he agreed that this happened. His position was that it was something that happened consensual.
That is correct.
Okay. And her position was that yes, it happened. It was not consensual.
That is correct.
Then Mr. DeWar indicated he did place his finger inside of her vagina.
Mrs. DeWatt indicated that he might have, in his
Okay.
own words, he said that he might have placed his finger inside of her. Things began to move kind of fast.
Okay. All right. But there were no physical injuries to her. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Was
No visible.
was
No visible
Okay.
injuries. Yes.
were the sheets or bedding still on the bed from that night when you got there on the 28th?
She did say yes.
Okay. Were those bedding or sheets, were they taken into evidence?
She did not bring them into evidence. I did not
Okay.
meet with Miss Evans in her apartment. Miss Evans' roommate began to take her to Southern Crescent
Mhm.
Sexual Assault Center, in which I met them there that
Okay.
evening. And she brought the
Did-
clothing that she had on along with the condom.
Okay. So she had maintained the condom from the 26th.
That's correct. And Miss Evans stated she did not bathe or change her clothes.
Okay. All right. Did you ever look inside of her apartment or do any type of interview inside her apartment?
No, we did not.
Okay. So the sheets and bedding or any evidence that if there was evidence on that, that was not confiscated.
She stated that she kept them, but they were not confiscated by us. No.
Okay. All right. Did she ever describe being restrained or anything along those lines?
Not so much being restrained. She did state that he picked her up and kept her on top of him when he inserted
Okay.
himself.
Did she ever say that she tried to get off of him while she was on top of him?
She did not. Miss Evans stated that she froze entirely physically and went mute verbally.
Okay. All right. And my last question, did she indicate how many times they had been together sexually before the 26th?
Yes, she said twice prior to the 26th.
Okay. And I said one last question. This will be my last question. Did she indicate when they had actually met? How long had they
Yes.
known each other?
Yes, she indicated that they had met on the 22nd of May, 2023. That was their first time meeting.
Okay. And then she indicated they had sex that day?
Yes, she did.
Okay. So they had sex on the 22nd of 2023. They're alleged on the 26th of 2023 and some other day in between that.
The 24th as well of May,
Okay.
2023.
So every other day since the 22nd, there was the sexual intercourse always at that house?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. Thank you, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay, any redirect ideas?
No, Your Honor, the state rests.
Okay. Does the defense have any witnesses, Attorney Booker?
No, Your Honor, we do not.
Okay, we're ready for closings. 88 Freeman,
State waives opening.
okay, Attorney Booker.
Judge, I would submit on the aggravated sexual battery charge based on the officer's testimony. I do have a brief argument on the rape charge. I believe that's the 52741 warrant. According to 1661, a female forcibly and against her will is rape. And in this particular case, we certainly don't have anything regarding force. That's why I've asked the officer, has there been any force used or anything that would have been indicative of force? And she's indicated, in my impression, no, there's no force. The question is against her will. And if it was against her will, the defendant, in my opinion, again, would have to have some knowledge that it was against her will. And she did specifically state she didn't want to have sex prior to him, or she didn't want him to insert his finger inside of her, if I understand that correctly. And I'm sure Ms. Freeman will tell me if I'm wrong on the aggravated sexual battery. But when I asked, and Ms. Freeman asked the same thing, is when they were having sex, did she, try to get off of him? Did she tell him to stop? Did she say anything? And the officer's testimony was that she froze and went mute due to prior trauma. And so my argument is that the defendant would not have known that it was against her will and could not have inflected his will over her will if he was not aware that she did not want to have sex at that time. Between the time frame of whenever she said that she didn't want him to place his finger inside her and whenever he inserted his penis inside of her, I don't know what time frame that was. But Judge, I don't know that the state has met their burden. And I know it's obviously we had a probable cause here and it's a very low burden. But I don't know that they've met the burden for asserting that this was rape. I think they've met their burden. I'll agree on the aggravated sexual battery, but on the rape, I don't know that we have a forcibly and against her will position here. The other thing I would also, clearly we're all adults here, so I won't just say it being an adult, but a male and female laying in the bed with the woman in that posture. I don't know, Judge, what happened that day. I'm sure a jury at some point in the future would make that determination. But again, the case is one where The defendant is obviously charged with some very serious charges. Will concede on the sexual battery that they've met their burden, but the rape, I don't know that there's been testimony that she indicated to him that she wanted him to stop, or that she did not want him to insert his penis inside of her at that time. I guess it could be inflected that she didn't want his finger inside of her, but the actual penis portion of it, according to 1661, again, I don't know how he would know it was against her will. So that's my only argument, Judge. We concede on the second warrant.
Okay, thank you, Attorney Booker. Ada Freeman.
Thank you, Judge. We're asking that both charges are bound over to Superior Court. I believe in Officer Gill's testimony, she indicated that our victim did state prior to Mr. Duar inserting his finger into her vagina that she did not want to have sex. And I believe even in Mr. Duar's statement, he indicated that she did say that, but based on what he said, other occasions, he did not stop. We believe that it is enough that Ms. Evans did tell him that she did not want to have sex. She stated that when everything was happening, she froze, she went mute, she laid there. Your Honor, we think that there is sufficient testimony that a rape did occur. And so we're asking that you bind the rape charge over to Superior Court as well as the aggravated sexual battery.
Okay. In light of the evidence and testimony, I do find sufficient probable cause to bound over both the rape charge and the aggravated sexual battery charge against the defendant. That will be the order of the court today. And I want to thank both parties for their presentation of their case.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Thank you, Judge. Thank you for getting me first, Ms. Freeman.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
Thank you, Attorney Booker.
May I be excused, Your Honor?
Excuse.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, Attorney Booker.
Thank you, Judge.
Mhm.
And Judge, if you can give me a moment, we'll be ready.